To tonight's event on behalf of the Creative Writing Program and my colleagues over at the UGA Press. We're here to celebrate the launch into book form of the manuscript that I had the great privilege of encountering just over a year ago, Soft Apocalypse, and we're really pleased to have Leah Nieboer here with us tonight, and we're happy to share in this launch event with you. A couple things about background just before we get started. About the Georgia Poetry Prize specifically. It started about just almost a decade ago or so. I think the brainstorming began, and Leah is the 7th winner of the prize at this point, and the 8th must be already selected for next year at this point, given the timeline. But the Bruce and Georgia McEver Fund for the Arts and Environment is the funding source that got this thing off the ground, and it started out as a kind of consortium between Georgia Tech and GSU, two universities in Atlanta, of course, and us here at UGA. And I think GSU has moved out of that arrangement at some point along the way, but it's still very much a Georgia Tech UGA collaboration. And so the judges rotate each year from one university to another, one person to another. I know that Maggie Zawacki, our colleague here, has judged this prize, and it's in one of its previous iterations. So that's just a little bit about the prize, and it's open to, according to the guidelines, original and unpublished collections of English language work by North American writers, which means it's open to Canadian citizens as well, I suppose. And as I said, Leah is the 7th winner of this prize. A couple of thank yous I'd like to offer. First up, Bethany Sneed, who's the acquisitions editor at the University of Georgia Press. Thank you to you. She's been really the point person on this whole thing, at least for me, from the get-go, explaining how the process works, getting in touch with all of the participants, all of the people who submitted manuscripts, walking us through as a program how we do this, keeping the timeline going. It's been very easy for me anyway. So thank you to her for being the kind of quarterback on all that. That reminds me that the University of Georgia Press has books for sale here tonight, by which I mean Leah's book. I mean, they also have a huge backlog of other books, but I'm not sure those are for sale here tonight. Avid Bookshop is out here, as you saw on your way in, so please, when the reading is over, if you're not one of my students and don't already own a copy of the book, I think it would be very wise to purchase one and perhaps ask Leah to sign it. But anyway, they're out here for sale. I'd also like to thank Peyton Bailey. This is her first big event as our new assistant in creative writing in the creative writing program, and so this has thus far gone off flawlessly. So thank you for putting in the time and the effort and getting Leah here safely and acknowledging food restrictions and hotels and all the stuff that goes into a reading like this. I'd like to say maybe my biggest 3 thanks, though, for the 3 preliminary judges who spent inordinate amounts of time knocking the mountain of manuscripts down to a manageable hill of 30 for me to look at as the final judge. And they started obviously well over a year ago and did pretty quick work given how much there was to move through. As any of you who've ever been part of a poetry contest can appreciate. Those people were Cynthia Parker Ohene, who's a magnificent African-American poet on the West Coast. Her book, Daughters of Harriet, has just been shortlisted for a couple different prizes. It won the Colorado Prize, and so she was a third of the equation. Joel Craig, who's an old friend of mine, importantly a cyclist. You should always have a cyclist on a editorial board. In Chicago, he's a poet, he's an editor, he's also a literary curator of events out there. He was one of the trio of preliminary judges. And then our own Ginger Coe, who has since graduated, but she was a PhD student here for several years and a well-published poet teaching in Texas now. She batted cleanup, as the expression goes, with preliminary judges. So they did really a lot of work, and the majority of the weight was on their back for a lot of this prize. I remember where I was sitting and what I was doing when I read Leah's manuscript, just because I have one of those kind of memories, but I'd had a pile of 30 manuscripts on my desk or on my hard drive, as the case was, and I'd been very diligent about it, and I'd been making notes, and I'd been tossing stuff out and keeping stuff in, and I had it down to about 3 or 4 manuscripts I was going to revisit and sort of think about. I thought I knew which one of them was probably better, but I wasn't sure, and I was really almost done with like 3 of them when I came across Soft Apocalypse. And I can tell you, and I'm not exaggerating, but it's the only one of the 30 that I actually read the entire way through the first time. I was just like bewitched by the language. You know, it had this strange capacity to be at once kind of large and effulgent and excessive, and I was drawn to that, but then in another motion it would kind of cut itself back and get kind of scalpel-like and very severe. And so that was a dance I was kind of trying to understand as I was reading it. I was fascinated by the sentences and the forms and their kind of strangely connected discombobulation with each other, and the way that those forms seem to model the kinds of socialities that the book wanted to talk about, the ways of being with each other, the ways of being without each other in some possible future, erotic, political, social, whatever. It kept wanting to audition like different ways of being, and the forms seemed to do that no matter what the poems were ostensibly talking about. And then as you'll hear when Leah's reading, I mean, there's these conversations with Clarice Lispector in here, and I remember thinking, like, who has the cojones to talk with Clarice Lispector, or like, who has the fireproof suit to be able to sit in any zone even close to the white heat of that lady, you know, and not go up in flames or something. And so that was another, and they were very intriguing conversations, and not designed to impress us with the fact that, you know, like the author had read a really cool modernist Brazilian writer or something. And so, long story short, after an hour and a half or whatever it was, and my, you know, proverbial untouched wine was still in front of me on the desk, I just thought, well, like, my job here is done. I mean, we don't really have to, I didn't take a single note. You know, all of the chicken scratch that I'd written on all the other manuscripts just seemed like the rough draft to get me to where I was now. And so, of course, I read the final manuscripts. I went back to the would-be finalist pile and read those cover to cover just to make sure I was doing my due diligence, but it, you know, it was game over. It turned out the winner was this woman who's a Denver PhD student who had applied to the University of Georgia some 4 or 5 years earlier, and we of course admitted her, and she turned us down. So I remember thinking that seemed useful, and somehow, you know, rejection is a wonderful thing sometimes. And so, but in the time since selecting the manuscript over the past year or so, I've been really happy to get to know Leah. We've been texting and just chatting on Messenger and stuff. And in addition to obviously being a really brilliant, artistically talented person, she's really funny, she's really generous. Not above bitching and gossiping, I think that's fair to say. I would like to acknowledge the two of us go low, we go high, you know. But it's one of the great pleasures in poetry, I guess, to get to know people who are of the art and of the company and that you feel like are friends along the way. And it doesn't happen every day, if I may. So, but look, this book and this person deserve a proper critical introduction beyond these silly words. So I would like to invite poet and translator Zach Anderson to come up and do the honors.
Communication is a registry of modern longings, writes John Durham Peters in Speaking into the Air. The term evokes a utopia where nothing is misunderstood, hearts are open, and expression is uninhibited. I'm thinking of Peters because communication consistently fails in Leah Nieboer's debut collection, Soft Apocalypse, a book that tirelessly seeks minor events of sociality among the ruins and relics of capitalist realism. In poems like Flash Processing of a Private Year, for example, metaphors of dead media become noisy outgrowths of the body, with the runtime spooling out over the counter and the mouth full of hopelessly tangled cassette tape. Even speech itself, which ought to be the clearest sign of bodily presence on which the communication ideal rests, denatures into vocables pitching over a string of untenable letters, pulled loose, loosening. Across Soft Apocalypse, these communication failures tend to play out in what Marc Auger calls non-places, sites like a fluorescent line at the pharmacy, factories, airliners, public pools, drainage ditches, parking lots, or foreclosed parts of the city. In his introduction to supermodernity, Auger argues that place and non-place are like opposed polarities. The first is never completely erased, the second never totally completed. They are like palimpsests on which the scrambled game of identity and relations is ceaselessly rewritten. And Soft Apocalypse is certainly interested in rewriting, with the city recomposing its foreclosures as high-rises, a rogue wind scattering papers into a profound disorder, the speaker scribbling approximations of the future, or the surface noise on a worn-out record. Among these various acts of re-recording, Nieboer's attention to auditory detail in particular highlights how sound, in its vibratory dimension, creates both wanted and unwanted entanglements of body and atmosphere, to borrow a phrase from Marina Peterson. These entanglements let places and non-places leak into each other, and stochastic moments of strange intimacy emerge. For instance, in the poem Minor Events 3, one that reminds me of Ralph Ellison's essay Living with Music, noise makes porous the well-regulated, relentlessly individualizing units of the apartment block. An argument is rising through the roof. I'm spaced out listening to the couple next door on the upper edge of love, or something lifting off. Here, poetry is overheard, literally. Soft Apocalypse shows us that while the standard channels of communication consistently fail, it's the leakages, palimpsests, and indeterminacies of the non-places that allow something like sociality to emerge. Even if we can't be certain that a receiver exists, the softness of this apocalypse comes in the impulse to transmit, to vibrate sympathetically, to get in contact. Quote, we send sound waves, a kiss, a compass, a forward oscillation into the desert like a love letter. Please join me in welcoming Leah Nieboer.
Thank you. Only in my night did the world slowly revolve. Halogen drop in the spokes. I reached through, and on one side, a hard tiredness overtook me. On the other, the moon shouldered off its clouds, took what it was offered. A job as an understudy, a flower from the hardware store, a nickel, for example, is easy. I am also other than what I imagine myself to be. A diorama of the room affords only a second-hand sofa, a proposal juked, a view of all those happy girls pressed up against the walls in the violeted light. I'm yours too, anonymously. Thanks so much to Andrew and Zach for those generative and generous and critical introductions. It is an absolute pleasure to be here in Athens for this launch, and I'm not sure if it's the weather, but I've had only friendly interactions with everybody thus far, and to get to be with and talk poetry with people for a couple days is a real gift. So thank you to the UGA Creative Writing Department for making this happen. Thank you, Andrew. I feel dead lucky that my first book has found its home here with UGA Press via you. In part, several years ago, before the PhD thing, when I wasn't really sure at all where or how I fit in poetry because of what I was interested in doing on the page, an advisor said to me, hey, you might like to check out this young guy, Andrew Zawacki. And of course I did, and of course I loved what I read, and the work activated and agitated something in my brain about what form can reckon with and what is possible on the page, and how a poem can make these sonic and formal gestures around a central bewilderment without having to resolve them, you know, and be with the irresolve of that. And that was huge. And then of course, that was followed by Susan Howe and Liz Spector, as Andrew mentioned, who runs through this book. Really not of my own accord, you know, she's like undeniable. And Moten and Mackey and Akilah Oliver and all these others. So I will quit with the rigmarole, but that's just to say this meandering path, you know, just continues to deposit me in this kind of convocation of distant or closer, intimate others, which is how I found myself in poetry. And I'll just say now, my posture in poetry is that of a listener in large part because of those others. And so I find myself in this spiraling motion of the ear in and out, sort of in this tense, strained attention, and also in this looseness, which is where some of that tension and excess comes from, but largely where all these other strange beloveds, nocturnal wanderers, etc., come into the poems. Gusty winds may exist. Dust storms the next 5 miles. I'd made sacrifices, nova in the envelope of my chest. I refused to participate in ultimate events, soaked up each morning thanking the cicadas coming wet and silent out of their shells. One year I wrote love letters, 156, to complete strangers, then abruptly gave them up. Rolled away from the exponential, past the sex shop glowing over my face, me like some faded foil in a XXX rock opera. It was, after all, my moment. The stitch of a film frame blitzing out an illness, a lyric complication, shit fiction. I dreamt myself out of bed. The insomniac choir overhead went on buzzing up a line of credits. Flash processing of a private year. Wholly spent, it seems, standing in a fluorescent line at the pharmacy, a depression behind the auricular, function, fissure, window. Next, hacking the death quiet of the alphabet, spiraling in a weather, an acidic rain slants anachronic, traveling her spine. Where environment, where incidental sorry collisions key up the uneasy cosmology into public disarrangement. Make a run for it, listener. The clavicle punctures up, the nerves articulate the back of, the heart doing its best, stalling the mean angular motion of stratum, her body flinty, the body an event eventual, everybody open and fantasizing. In collapsing fashion. A stellar and maybe arthritic, sweet Lord, Hail Mary rhetoric, trying to pray, praying over cold coffee, the runtime spooling out over the counter, cross-referencing herself in keystrokes, drum rattle, a handful of life cycles, crumpled receipts, saved up against the atomic clock, velocity escapes. The mouth full of hopelessly tangled cassette tape. A strip of numerical detachments. A woman leans across, slips a bright pink pill, just like the kiss of an answer. Well, into her palm. Well, we all need a little help sometimes, baby. A torn off glorious color. Her voice calling up a cold sweat, a dance floor, a kind of prayer spinning its glittering record inside of what? An unfeeling sentence. The official measure of a complete and undeviating orbital oranging everybody. This is the year, baby. Lashing against the backward infliction of the epic, the beatific idea the body shimmies out of making, a passionate making. Micrometrical escapes toward the zero streams, barely audible pulmonics, intimating, will you call me? Can you let me know if the books fall off the shelves like synchronized swimmers, their spines coming apart underwater, the protective envelope dissipates, shining, weightless, not trying to be good after all. They only use the word containment, or was it contaminant? After somethings, well, many somethings spilled, guttering somewhere. Inside, her voice, her vocables pitching over, a string of untenable letters pulled loose, loosening. Will you let me know if the pressure's all right, you're all right, or too much? Function, a fissure, her fisting the crisp sheets, the shape thrown back with a hard swallow. Will you let me know? Her hip digging into the cold metal table like a joke, splitting the room, then running out of reach. Oh, sorry. incidentals purpling up the harmless marvel of her thigh. Sirens going off outside, testing the sky's civically held breath, cyan and shallow, like a basin for ritual whose hands terror, error, push, collect, remember her, soft-bound, recursive, push, overflow. On a sleepless night, kilometers and kilometers below what had been a great city, we go on our knees to the church of the Neon Cross, watch supplicants race the strip, no muffler, smoke tearing through our nostrils, pink Jesus blinking mutely overhead in a final effort to turn our eyes up from the buckled pavement. At what price? You're still the person I wanted to tell about the changes I've been making. We trade between our emptied hands. We look again at the disaster. We mark each other, semantic insecurity. At what point does a person become sad and solitary? Is a question Liz Spector never answered after a long drag on her cigarette. In the soft underside of the ashen city, I dream we've written the end of the movie. I wake up and find we've written only, how do I get out of this production machine? If I had to pick someone to read the prose poems, who is not me, and I would like to, it would probably be Patti Smith, just to get that like snarling, Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine. You know, like that's exactly the energy I want, like that kind of like razor sharp, uncompromising, breaking out into this totally excessive run around, can't catch her kind of, vocalizing. So bless Patti Smith. I wish she were here to read all these poems for me. So it's no secret that most of the speakers and figures in Soft Apocalypse are wobbling onto the page like hard up for cash or time or a pinch of relief. And one of the things that I was thinking about while I was writing this book, or that I'm always thinking about, is these kinds of impasses, both tangible and intangible, like these architectures that we contend with in this age that we are in. And that, at least when I tune into that, that's kind of the sweet spot, right? Like that frustration, I feel like is a place where we might attune to alternate places and economies and alternate gestures and relationships, are just like the excess of, rubbing up against each other and then that dissipating in a way that totally escapes the code of the production machine. And so I'm interested in how these things might fail to add up to something, but nonetheless generate pleasurable ways to be right here, or generate new openings for the future if we're willing to attune to them. However out of order the body is a public place, if only somebody will listen to it. The rumble of certain cellular exchanges, siren of its soft tissues, helicopter whir as it turns over, dear insomnia, the hanging dial tone of its most mesopelagic, scattered, fished for, research thieving, used up, obstructed pulses, supplicating at a payphone around the corner, a hiccup, no quarters for a connection. Hello, hello, hello. Also, if people won't. A building collapses in a foreclosed part of the city and nobody calls it in. Nobody calls to say, I miss you, green shutters. Oh, I need you, broken screen door. The bougainvillea grows bright and long and lazy over the porch, and an afternoon secretly recorded like those temporary beds we made tangles itself between the vines, gets off. This isn't about loss, not exactly, though only readiness is, in the end, affordable. She unzips the overnight bag she's always kept in a corner. Ridiculous. She spilled again into the street, nearsighted, adjusting, where a developer in slick camel-colored loafers appraises the site of each failure, eyeing a new upward trajectory through which the body inevitably falls. Quiet. Which is a surreptitious line. Between two notes of music, there are street lights, night repairs, there is a little soup, a sub-rational argument, a discarded silhouette. On side B, someone is raising the rent. Black car cruising the windows on the other side of the street where I also am, almost turning inside of that crushed velvet dress. Happy Christmas, you texted. Quick heavy snow punching a hole in the sky. I'll sew up later tonight with old sequins. Down at the American Legion, Angel slides a bright green shot down the bar. Honey, don't you know by now? You can play a shoestring so long as you're sincere. Washed up, ultraviolet morning. In bed, in a fever, giving thought to distances, cold little gasps of misinformation going around the objects on the nightstand, just the usual instruments rubbing together against expression. We could try a different position, let the face produce an impression, a visible crease articulating the cheek. In my dream, you twine together an edible flower, its round leaves a buttery orange expression of nasturtium. A good love spiraled in, giving no thought. We moved in the reverberation of the jet stream, the body glitzing its confetti hopelessly across North America. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. If there were a place to draw one continuous line against another, this could be it. Us folding each other up at the corners, indicators of future occurrences, and in the center, microchemical raptures, softly ceasing to be directional, being dimensional instead. Foreclose me. In this scene, a gale blows and scatters my papers into a profound disorder. Then is the future, a hand wrapped on the table. Then whatever the day behind us becomes, a darkened face, an overstuffed letterbox, so sexual, or no one home. At night, a spliced montage of stolen, split-level dreams, of houses, sleep horses. With time, the desired body will, if you put a little change in this machine, disappear. Quarter after quarter, the hands know what to do. They connect the wires. They plug into the question. The EKG going off on a little television in no one's bedroom, 4 channels tuned to a purpler future. So what? I deal in raw materials. I deal in dream residuals. I'm not interested in spending a day shopping on some avenue, walking an old logic, marvelous rock on a leash down the street. I'm afraid of the pointing, the abstraction, getting mortgaged, being drug along for no reason. Kiss me again, kiss me again. The sun glances off the cement. The mouth tastes of zinc. As it happens, I have always believed in the baptismal properties of yellow, in the way violet fucks pink into purple, a big promise, a little change, something falling from your hand. Anyway, it's cheap. The proposal drops like a cardboard set to the stage. I freeze, everyone watching, everyone made ridiculous, playing a part, the windows blasted open, a house vaporizing behind, each face as if we were waking up to something. A short circuit in the weather, my breath on the mirror after a shower I wouldn't share. The curtain closes on the bed. There is never any time to return, like a believer, like an earthling, oblivious to someone, to this rock. Imagine waking up again to an unabstracted given, to that canary yellow kitchen, plunging the hands in, the sink flowing over. In retrospect, how did I keep that color? I let it get away with me. I let it wash me out, cycle after cycle. The players are identical, sugar-struck animals, strip after strip after strip. I mean, look at all of this. Stupid disturbance on stained paper taped to the walls. You photogenic, rampant person. December begins to look like a dream. And someone in the rhythm who escapes the measure. Or only an idea I harnessed once for a minute. The love scene was ecstatic, full of believers. October, November, December. I couldn't go there with you. I could only go there with you. I never in the actual pass through that old house anymore. I draw big diagrams. I scribble approximations of the future. You'll be a danger forever to me. 10 years is nothing. A little change, a logic of whispers. I'm telling you, there is never any time. You are nobody's church. We are more and more cities with a steep interval between delicacies. Nothing we never return to. I find it useful and generative in all my projects, including like my life project, my embodiment project, to think of the future not as belonging to a temporal scale, but as something that can be concerned with space and its rearrangements, rhythms of relation, interactivity, etc., so that we can think or perform the future within the materials of the present, like with what we have right here. And that also allows us to go sort of into the past or what may yet happen in the past. And I'm just like, shooting little arrows in that direction or trying to like brush up against where's the future in space. But Jose Munoz's brilliant, beautiful, never-ending book, Cruising Utopia, The Then and There of Queer Futurity, is the one I was reading and will always be reading, but the one I was reading while I was writing this book. And he goes back to like find the future in this performative space of like the public toilet and queer relationships there, so that even where, these bodies have disappeared or gone out of view, the kinds of gestures and what they have left in space create this kind of potential energy that you can go back to. And that helps me think about kind of like both not being, silent about loss, but honoring and animacy and the possibility that's still hidden and ongoing there. Read Jose Munoz if you do anything. Okay. I was gathering raw material. I was seeking an expanse. We were living yet at angles to ourselves, blinking on and off, reversing inside, painting the yellow lines, the factory floor, the road narrowing. I thought of the space between my legs, gradients, the fervid rooms, vectors, a rover powering down, the nearness of my mind to a bird climbing high and alone in the clear air. This is a test. The morning blares its lament over the shifting streets, foreclosures, busted up tennis courts I might have used in childhood to practice my crossover. A future came fast, faster, through the intestines, heart, liver, cellular transfer, chemical tentacles in the water, a hiccup in the brain. At point zero, every element becomes a startling thing. A wreck becomes an opening, A slick young porpoise washes up to the sandy edge. Dream of a sensible factory. There are exquisite breaks for languishing without reason in each doorway, an eccentricity, a ritual swing of hours, the variable wash of light, of the living. In the factory, it isn't loud. Anyone could talk themselves into a surprise, a purplish exchange. Anyone could get a little dirty, get a little cheeky, stay a while, please stay alive. Here, everything is bright. We, the workers, becoming solar array. We sit mending this or that on plush benches in hyperbolic arrangement, sipping a crisp feeling when it's warm and speculating about the latest news with an old amorous dog at our feet, licking them, senseless. Clean air works through our lungs, clearing the effects of some man who appeared on the television in a previous sort of suit, in a previous sort of age. We age, we stow our dreams in our experimental pockets. We finger their edges, remainders of the work, ideas, grand jetés, a future of unsold goods. Us, in each case, they are safe and accessible. We are the ones who make a riot of color. Someone unthinkable takes someone's unthinkable hand carefully, folded, unfolded. We move at different speeds. Arthritis is not a prohibitive condition for getting paid. I, too, fold the body into others. It makes a necessary question. It hurts to ask it, and we ask it, we ask it. This is a soulful operation. We sift ourselves through its expressions. We let others come to be understood. We practice inflating and deflating the lungs in synchronized fashion. Our labor furling, coming together extra-linguistically. You can find us on the hottest day of the year, under the influence of Venus, swimming without order, sweat on the upper lip. We observe the going world, and no figure appears, summarizable, lusty. Curiosity loops itself between our legs, and afterward, the tone is flexible, meteoric. We return, we make fortunate exchanges, cheap toolkits for heartbreak, unplanned catastrophes, STDs, bad dreams. No body is an impossible body. We stitch it into the soft clasp before sending the materials to the middles and the borders, to the northern edge of a city mid-composition. It's all so fucked, we say to each other, and keep going. We send sound waves, a kiss, a compass, a forward oscillation into the desert like a love letter to the animal, to the person shining up, to a crossing, to someone's mother still alive watching Jeopardy in her armchair looking for just a pinch of relief. The difference between dying and loving is slight. The world continues almost entirely at our expense. We send wet dreams down crowded alleyways of sleeping bags, transparent ceilings arching up, becoming cathedral. We toss wreaths around the absences, jimmy another space out of a resounding no, nowhere, somewhere, over and over, perhaps. When someone dies in the factory today, it is without fear. We carry them off the dance floor in the disco light, in their exuberant whirl. We send them from our horizon in a bright blue robe made by hand, studiously sequined. This is how we will recall the time and what it could have meant when we slip out of its pocket, when they come smooth and rivering to gather us remainders in. Things had gone back to being what they were. A couple rocking across the television, the scratch of the needle on a worn-out record. If I were trying to get to Tuskegee, what exit would I take? Another accident flagged on the shoulder, a line of cool-eyed Madonnas at the roadside market. Had I left a little lipstick on the pillow, we had left a surgical silence, a tear in the vertical. Warm me up. Instead, with your guesses, dumb suggestions, the truth loops itself out of eyeshot 1,000,000 miles below the interstate. The years go and go before I could say what was real and what had gone galloping through my dreams. I did get to where I was going next. I stood on a roof half-dressed, watching a jet wake stretch itself into the most insane blue you'll ever in sunlight see. I would be remiss if I did not thank UGA Press folks, Beth, Jason, and Aaron Kirk, who's not here, for making such a beautiful object and for taking such exquisite care of this cover image. The painting by Joanna Schofska called Playing with Fire, which is one truly of fraught emergence and arrivals, both in the making and in the finished work. And she is also, we've been in contact, and she is as more out into the other world in this like vibrant, excessive space, but with her own tools for like rigorously going there, you know. So it's just such a pleasure that worked out, and thank you so much, UGA, for taking care of this little book. I was told I had a couple more minutes if I wanted to read some new work. So I'm just going to read one, okay, maybe two. I'll read two poems. I think of precarity as our, central condition, and this is like just this conjectural architecture that we almost fall out of at every step. It's like a wonder we keep a hold of anything ever. But I also think of precarity as a site for emergence, like this open, unsettled boundary, and that's what I want to listen to more and more. So grab these. The next poetry book that I'm working on, I know I've been talking to some people about I'm writing a novel, and I am, but I cannot talk about that right now. So the next book of poetry is tentatively titled Sick Future, and imagines the possibilities, particularly of queer and sick bodies in this age of rapid planetary change, global pandemics, and ongoing capitalist devastation. But it's a way of rethinking and refeeling our environments from within these sick bodies. And rather than focusing on narratives of healing or restoration or somehow going back to an origin point that was never there in the first place, this book is going to ask how we live together now within our losses by, desiring and taking care of and taking cues from our most precarious bodies. You get what you pay for. A dilation to the wish dimension, an echo delocation, a parabolic dive in a tight-fitted, rented suit. As if stripping down to a likeness could be one side of the solution. Something tucked under, cinched, something slicked back. At the end of a long line of audited hours, everyone is trying to get famous, get some Xanax, get uppish, get paid. Jules, I too am trying to get an experiment going. I'm trying to give someone the slip, get a little nocturnal astonishment, $3 for a backdoor ticket, some fringe benefits, popcorn on the house. If it's any comfort, in the end, somebody else's pretty face gets blown beyond proportion above us all unreadably. I'm going to read the more disrupted one because I know you can handle it. Amateur diver. Reverse entropic fluctuations in the wake of a hose hooked up to the trawler, dragging a net, not quite catching up to the fast fishing of this future body. A field of debris in the water. In the last year of the cicadas, the gesture begins to supersede the form, the bleached out understructure, laborious breath work. I am supposed to tell you what dreams I had. What an improvisational, cool compilation of that morphology I asked for. Those words I heard down there, questions only, wrap around. We're ready for you now. An unbolted metal rattle, the hands move toward the pink shallows, swallows some words, a warming you couldn't. Television never from the top, cast an orange ring around what was that? Compression I woke up in, I heard in the deep, freewheeling, where so much silence, and down every hallway, the over-drilled children driving our beds out to sea in the wake of executive decisions, chicken shit, ones all, dust, unbreathable motes, varnished to a sick sheen off those numbers. In this climate, I don't love those numbers. People keep telling me tomorrow to take it easy, hold steady, past the curved scissors. The device at the bottom, defunct, blue-green, fritzing on and off, each obsolescent looking glass fished up to. In this disensouled climate of stupid amuse-bouche parties, we are in the heart of ultrasounds, finances changed, laughter, touching the shoulder prettily without investment. I've had enough now of scarcity, screens glitching, bureaucratic, excessive, God out of hand, and jerk-offs at the other side of the buffering. Mendless fistful of hours scrawled on the gut screen, the reddened measure of blips turning over bright somersaults at the horizon. Hold steady with me, adjust that trash dizziness, barely audible solar plexus of all this too hot, automatic bed we lie and lie and lie and lie in, surveilled, surveilling, gauze drawn across. We knew time would end us. I trace with a grainy finger slowly, love, could you please? Thank you.